All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our MedEd meeting on Friday morning, bright and early. Thanks, everybody, for coming. My name is Jason Rosenstock. I'm representing the Academy of Master Educators. Our faculty development series continues, and we are really excited about this session today. We've been planning this for a while. We're going to have a debate, hopefully some fireworks, hopefully find out the truth, what we need to do. It's really exciting for me. I want to just sort of set up our format and talk about what we're going to do today so that we're all on the same page. I think this session kind of got generated after, we were sitting in faculty meetings, promotions committee, retention, consensus grading sessions, and we noticed that there were fault lines between faculty, right? There were some faculty who might be called the old guard who were sort of get tough on these students and let's fail them, and if they didn't do it, tough for them. And there are other sort of softies who were like, well, but it's really hard being a medical student, and we got to be understanding. And so there are these fault lines, and I'm sure many of you have seen these sorts of things. And we kind of wondered, what to make of that and how we might think of that and what might be the best philosophy to have as we deal with learners. This tension exists, and we've noticed the tension between faculty and with sort of learner-driven approaches to education that we're really interested in. Traditional faculty teaching styles and approaches tend to be structured, formal, direct, text-based, high expectations, tough, right? But they somehow may seem misaligned with what learners these days are looking for, particularly our millennial learners who have different kind of preferences for more interactive, informal kinds of teaching in short bursts where they may multitask and they use technology and it's related to their salience, the personal relevance of the material. We're just doing it. They should feel rewarded because that's sort of the way they grew up. And just enough is good enough. Pass equals MD. So these sorts of differences between the way faculty think about it and the way students think about it really was striking to us. And it's not clear who's right, which side is best. Do faculty really know better? Should we resist these teaching fads that go against generations of educational approaches? Or are we clinging to outmoded models of education that should be discarded to become more learner-centered, and newer teaching, should we adhere to newer teaching approaches that actually do have some evidence behind it? So that's the theme for today, what we wanted to tackle. And I think this is a resolution, what we want to address today, that for medical students to be successful, they need to be held to very high standards, held accountable for performance, and taught in ways that faculty think they should learn. So this is sort of the traditional approach. And I think the idea is that maybe we should be demanding achievement and holding them to high standards, even if it disadvantages the students in the match, let's say. So this is one of the examples of how this might play out in education. So this is our resolution, and to argue this, we have two teams of senior faculty who have been thinking about these issues for a long time. Arguing for this proposition, we have Cynthia Lance Jones, who is Associate Professor for Neurobiology and Assistant Dean in the Office of Medical Education. Mike Mangione, who is Associate Professor of Anesthesiology and the Chief of Anesthesiology at the VA. He is the Clerkship Director for the Anesthesiology Clerkship. Don DeFranco, who is Professor and Vice Chair of Education from Pharmacology and the Associate Dean responsible for medical student research, the Scholarly Project. And hopefully joining us soon is Kathy McIntyre-Seltman, who is a Professor of Obstetrics Gynecology and an Advisory Dean at the School of Medicine. Here she is! What an entrance!
But we're loose, we're relaxed, come late, no big deal.
Right at your introduction, good work. Okay, so you follow what we're doing here? These are the yays, the people who are going to argue for this proposition. These are the nays, the people who think this is bunk and are going to argue against it. And what we're going to do is give each side about 10 minutes to present their case, either pro or con. And then, after each side goes, we're going to give them another 5 minutes to go at each other with rebuttal. Okay? And I'm going to time you to hold
It played right into my
normal
head.
debate rules. Okay? So, after the rebuttal, hopefully we'll have an answer, but maybe we won't. And so that's when we need your help. So the second half, we want you to chime in with your thoughts, what you think about this question, responding to any of the things our panelists brought up. We want to have plenty of time for that discussion. We good for the format? All right, so I think we're going to start off with the yays. You guys want? I'm going to set my timer, and you guys are ready to go.
Okay, I'm going to go first and give you sort of a global view of a pro for this proposition. And I want to do it by starting with a question, which is, what does a beginning medical student bring to the table when they first enter medical school? Okay. Now, many of the incoming students have a really remarkable ability to take in information and commit things to memory, especially a huge number of facts and concepts. And they have had remarkable academic success. Others have exceptional service ability, or experience, and demonstrated altruism. Still others have remarkable perseverance and have overcome many obstacles. The case I would begin by making is that most entering medical students may have one or two of these characteristics, but none of them have all of them. So how do we help them develop these kinds of characteristics? High expectations encourage students to push hard in areas where they're weak. Faculty and students alike need to push against something to become strong. If I, as a facilitator, for example, in a small group, let a student who is anxious about answering questions go through a class without saying anything, am I not failing that particular student by not giving him or her a chance to practice that skill? Having high expectations, I should say, has to apply to all of the students. If you seem to be accommodating one student's weakness, then he or she can easily pick up this accommodation and begin to feel deficient, and a downward spiral can occur. Now, why should a medical student be open to change when they've been so successful in their studies in the past, okay, before they were in medical school? Why should they accept a specific learning format when they have successfully used other formats in the past? One reason is that medical school can present hurdles that they haven't encountered before. For example, the necessity to choose what should be memorized, because in a medical school class, the student doesn't have time to memorize everything. Another reason is that being willing to try new things and to listen to the views of others is an important doctoring skill. Doctors are synthesizers and sorters of information from patients and their family, from technicians, specialists, and other caregivers. Does a diagnosis and a treatment plan leap unbidden from the brain of a single doc? If it does, it probably will and should be questioned. Medicine is overburdened with information. New approaches appear in the literature every day, and doctors must sort through this information and decide what is relevant in their practice. Further, they must be able to count on colleagues to provide information outside their own area of expertise. As to what might be termed the formulaic, arbitrary, traditional ways that medical school courses may embrace, these are often shortcuts that allow teachers and doctors to cut to the chase. Do students really want to approach every new physical exam by deciding what order to do things in? Medicine is an intellectual process with the pressure of time and the ever-present threat of doing harm. What is the value of accountability for performance? I realize and fully accept that students will miss deadlines for course assignments for a wide variety of purposes, both reasonable and unreasonable. I realize and fully accept that a student's mindset will, to an extent, subvert faculty directives. However, everything that students do in medical school, both inside and outside of the classroom, is geared toward the development of professional skills and habits. The operative word here is development, and development requires recognition of what works and what doesn't. So, in summary, I would say that success as a medical student can be defined as success as a sort of proto-doctor. Not a genius, not wealthy, not an angel or a saint, and not a debate champion, but an individual who's open to change and able to evaluate his or her growth in these arenas, who will work to refine his or her own system for holding multiple things in play.
So I was going to narrow this down to a more specific topic, which Jason alluded to in his introductory comments, which is the grade debate. Yeah, and I'm going to read from the original email that I got months ago defining how we were going to do this. Quote, our basic idea was to have two pairs of faculty debate the proposition that for students to be successful, they need to be held to very high standards, held accountable for performance, and taught in ways that we think they should learn. One group would argue, yay, that's our group. That's the tough love group. That would set strong limits and have traditional beliefs about learning, i.e. students should come to class, if students fail, they should be dismissed, etc. The other group would be the nay group, believing that we need to be more flexible, accepting millennials for who they are, allowing them to learn however they learn best, give them lots of chances to learn in a stress-free environment using new approaches. Let's give them leaves of absence and allow them chances to remediate. And so in the spirit of friendly debate and noting that Jason asked for fireworks in his introductory comments, I will point out that one of the members of the nay group arrived 8 minutes late this morning. So let's give her a chance to remediate.
And one arrived 8 minutes early, so we canceled each other out.
Yeah, we came out even. We're a team.
That's right.
Because millennials like teams.
That's right.
Whereas the yay group were each here 15 minutes early. Yeah. So I passed out the grade distribution that went out with dean's letters, and everyone should have a copy of that. And I blanked out everyone but anesthesia. This is something that we went over in our most recent retention committee meeting. And you can see that anesthesia really is an outlier here in terms of our grade distribution. And we designed this along with my colleague here, Dr. Ivinson, who is a PhD in statistician, about 2 years ago or so. We examined, I think, 2 years' worth of grades, and we decided what the distribution for honors and high satisfactory would be based on, quote, high standards, and thinking that honors should be something that was only distributed when those very high standards were met. And as you can see, and again, not being critical to anyone, that made us an outlier. So going back to some of the comments Dr. Lance Jones made, high expectations, high standards, encourage students to push hard in the areas where they might be weak. What is the value of accountability for performance? And holding students to high standards is the responsibility of the faculty. It's also the responsibility of the faculty to be consistent. And so when we look at all of the grades, the distribution, excluding my clerkship, is 42% honors, 43% high satisfactory, 15% satisfactory. Two clerkships awarded honors to more than half of the students, which means that students performing below the mean received an honors grade. Two clerkships awarded honors or high satisfactory to 95% of students, meaning that students in the lowest 10th percentile received a grade greater than satisfactory. Four clerkships awarded honors or high satisfactory to 90% of students, again meaning that those in the lowest 20th percentile received a grade greater than satisfactory. Half of the clerkships awarded honors or high satisfactory to greater than 75% of students, meaning that to be considered satisfactory, you had to be in the lowest quartile. So we're not judging students against their peer groups anymore. There were only 2 grades out of unsatisfactory across all of the clerkships. 145 students, meaning I calculated 1,450 grades were distributed and only 2 of them were unsatisfactory. So a success rate of 99.8%. And I question, are we awarding participation trophies to our medical students? Do they need to do nothing more than show up to get satisfactory and do nothing more than participate a little bit to get honors or high satisfactory? And I question, how does guaranteeing them success benefit them? How does guaranteeing them superior performance benefit them? Students are routinely incredulous when they get their anesthesia grade because they didn't get honors. And I routinely hear, well, the comments were good. What do you mean that I didn't have a superior performance? On the other hand, a satisfactory performance is now deemed a failure. Students are beside themselves that they only got satisfactory, and they're apologetic. So I question, are we preparing them for a future in a stressful, demanding, highly competitive field? And I'll finish by noting what the VA Pittsburgh proficiency report for attending's requirements are. I've been doing the staff proficiency reports over the last couple of weeks. And satisfactory is fully met and sometimes exceeded expectations. High satisfactory usually exceeded reasonable expectations by a substantial margin. Outstanding consistently exceeded reasonable expectations to an acceptable degree, and unsatisfactory has not met reasonable expectations. So what's going to happen to our medical students, 5, 8, 10 years from now, when they're faculty and they're having their performance evaluated by a crusty old dog like me, and they're expecting to, get an outstanding performance evaluation simply because they showed up and got their job every day, done every day.
Outstanding, outstanding. All right, we heard very strong arguments from the yay side. Now let's turn to the nay side.
I'll go first.
Oh, all right. We agree completely that students should be held to a high standard. What we would disagree with our esteemed colleagues about is how to get from there to here. So I would submit to you that for those of us who are baby boomers, which are many of us in this room, and those of us who are Gen Xers, who are some of us in this room, that the millennial group constitutes really a different culture from our culture. And I would submit that in the spirit of cultural competence, that we as faculty need to meet these students where they are. That does not mean we shouldn't have high expectations. But just like we address students from different ethnic cultures that may have needs to approach things slightly differently, that we should also engage with millennials as those coming from a different subculture. So what is that culture? They grew up, partly our fault, so we have to take some of the fire for this, as helicoptered, overly scheduled, never making a decision for themselves. Where are they now? They are eternal children, okay? They are not super independent. Distinguish that from the Gen X people who were latchkey kids, who basically had premature adulthood, who grew up quite independent. There's a huge culture conflict right there between those of you who are that generation and our millennial age students. So we really need to respond to them by having extremely clear expectations and direction, more than we think they need. And when we do that, they will live up to those expectations. They want to be flexible. They grew up that way. And as my esteemed colleague to the left said, everybody gets a trophy. They grew up, everybody gets a trophy. You participate, you're there. They come to us and say, I worked really hard, why didn't I get honors? So we need to address that, I think, by providing very frequent, very concrete, very specific feedback. They grew up with that, they need that. They do not, you can't take this group of people, turn them free and say, go out and succeed. They need more infrastructure, more feedback, more direction than that. Yet if we allow them the flexibility to process in their own way, they will achieve high goals that we expect. In particular, one of my millennial consultants that I spoke to prepare for this recommended that I particularly emphasize that they want to know why. So on Wednesday this week, I met with a group of first-year students, and I was talking about something, it's like, well, the policy of the school is blah, blah, blah. And 2 or 3 of them looked up at me and said, why? So as faculty, we need to not take that personally. We need to not be offended. That is the way that this group has grown up and how they learn. And they want a real answer. That's not just about policies, but they want real answers about medical stuff. They want to learn. So if we can meet them where they are in terms of how they learn, their multitasking, their computer, etc., savviness, and we can be creative in our responses, they will meet our expectations, exceed our expectations, and become excellent physicians that we expect them to be.
Okay. I have a quick PowerPoint that's going to elaborate some of the same things that Cam has said, focusing on my expertise, which is in preclinical education. So, start. Should stop the timer, Jason. All right. Okay. So here's the proposition, and I think what we need to do is think about an alternative to this proposition, and it really puts the onus on us and our students, and that is, how can we best deliver what our students need and what they want to be successful? In other words, if you build it appropriately, they will come and they will succeed. So I'm going to talk about a few publications that are kind of interesting because they really focus on our conceptions or misconceptions about millennial learners. And this comes from the University of Central Florida, published in 2016, and it really looked at active learning. Right? And this is the new scape, I think, right?
The palm trees.
Yeah.
Right. So here's myth or fact. And this is from the paper. Millennials are highly interconnected and enjoy teamwork and collaboration. Myth or fact. And this was based on a survey between faculty and students. And what you can see, which is really surprising, at least at Central Florida, is that, I don't like the way they graph this, but the bottom line is, if you look at the data, they would suggest that their students find lectures more effective, which is hardly something that involves teamwork. And they find TBLs, which is team-based learning, less effective. Students at Central Florida want a higher percentage of lectures. So how does this really fit with our conceptions or misconceptions about millennials and their learning styles? If you look at our own courses, this is from, I think, our course, Cynthia, a few years ago. I'm okay to show it, not very flattering, but I want to highlight the fact that in our course we had TBLs, we had flipped classrooms, that's question 11 and 12, and they were the least valuable parts of our curriculum, our course. So what does that mean? Is it really the students' fault, or is it really our fault? So I see Jen back there, and Jennifer, and what I want to highlight is that, we hear all the time about lectures are dead. But if you look at our 2 most popular courses and our most valuable courses, I think, in the first year anatomy and the second year cardiology, a huge fraction of those courses are lectures. Not all, but a big fraction. So how do they get away with doing a huge amount of lectures in courses for groups that are looking for team-based? And I would argue that it's because execution. These guys execute. Execution is critical. Now to finalize, I want to go back to reality. This is Pennsylvania now, Penn State. You can see this may be the new scape up here. Dead trees and snow. And this is cows. Not starts with. And this is a study performed at Penn State Medical School. And this was not a survey-based, but this was based on experts who came in and evaluated their pharmacology, which is what I teach. And their curriculum, in terms of their first 2-year pharm curriculum, is very similar to ours. And it doesn't matter what this slide is showing, but the little ticks are basically a lot of the farm lectures that are scattered throughout the organ system block and even in the first year. And they do have quite a few PBLs, but that's varied. And this is, I think, one of the key things that I want to highlight. And if you look here, what I want to highlight here is what they've done at Penn State in terms of their farm curriculum. They started out, 85% lectures. Then they went to a more PBL base, cut down the lectures quite a bit. And now they've moved back to 60% lectures. But what they have now is 20% of the time devoted to, review sessions that are based on USMLE farm questions. And this is something that they recognize the student needs. They didn't do away with lectures, they didn't cut down lectures. They added more, but they recognize that it's part of the whole continuum of farm education. So I think that's all I have. Did I miss one? No, I think that's it. But I'm going to end with the beginning slide, just to kind of highlight that we think it's up to us to deliver what our students need, what the millennial generation needs to be successful. And I think we can, if we execute it well, as I think Kim has said, we meet our students where they are on their path to success. And I think that's why we have to be a little more flexible.
So can you just point out like 3 things that would make a successful lecture for a millennial? Since if they want lectures, what should we do to make them good?
Fancy shirts might help, right? No, I think it's a matter of engaging them. I mean, Jennifer's back. I hate to put you on the spot. Yeah, I think it's partly. And when I looked at some of the literature, what they say about lectures, it's not about content. It's about telling a story. And Guy back there can.
My point of view is to not just lecture, but to engage.
Engage. That's right. And I think.
I try to ask questions from their previous year courses, put it in the context of what I'm talking about, and I also ask them some fundamentals, and not just let them sit and listen, but engage them.
I think that's key. It's not, this is not a session about lecture or not lecture, but I just want to highlight that we think of millennials as wanting teamwork and individual, but we can deliver content in other ways. And the key thing is that high yield is important. Little snippets are important. Engaging them. Telling a story is what I've read through many of the publications. Tell a story. Get the students engaged in any way you can. Not just throw out facts and content.
All right, I think this is a good break point. We've heard opening statements from both sides of this argument. Now it's time for rebuttal. So we'll let this side have 5 minutes to respond to any points that were raised.
Okay, you want me to go first? All right. So first, I'd like to say something about practice, millennials, and accountability. Okay, so first of all, I would tend to approach this by asking or pointing out that we really want students from the beginning to practice in a safe environment. Practice their skills, okay? One of the reasons I think, if you looked at Don's graph of our course, the thing they liked the best was the workshops. Why did they like the workshops best? Small group, comfortable environment, opportunity to practice, articulating their own ideas, okay? The other point about this that I would, and that's why I would stress the importance of accountability, is that, well, patients and other doctors are going to be millennials too, okay? And they're going to question. Patients and their families may not be millennials, but they'll have ideas about their treatment based on Googling things and based on television ads for drugs. Students need to be able to articulate their thoughts, do it quickly, because often the environment can be chaotic, they may be tired, up all night. They need to be able to practice doing that. And I think by making by making them accountable early on to learn some skills that they may not have been asked to do before is really important. They're going to, my major point is, they're going to be asked to explain things. They're going to be asked the why, okay? And they need to be able to deal with that and adapt to that kind of environment so they can be a successful doctor.
So I'll echo those comments a little bit. A couple of the things that we heard, were millennials are different. We should meet the students where they are. They want to be flexible. They grew up that way. They want to know why. And I will point out that ultimately, these medical students are going to be responsible to their patients someday. Right? So every time I see my primary care provider or I see any provider, what happens? Well, within 24 hours, I get an email with a patient satisfaction survey, as do all patients. And they're going to fill those satisfaction surveys out. And those patients aren't going to be interested in meeting their doctors where they are. They're not going to be dismissive and allow them for flexibility when their physician shows up 15 minutes late. They're not going. And I'm not coming back. They're not going to have any consideration when their physician says why, right? They want what they want. They want their doctors to be on time. They want their doctors to take good care of them. They want their doctors to meet their expectations and their needs. And they're not going to grade their physician with a superior performance just because everybody else is doing that. Those of us that are at the VA know that if a patient isn't satisfied, they go to their congressman, and that's a big deal. Then we get a congressional inquiry, and we have to justify everything that we do. So we really have a higher level of responsibility.
All right, rebuttal?
Yeah, I mean, you guys raised some great points, but what I'm going to do, Cynthia,
We argue a lot.
Okay. I have a problem with your use of the word proto-doctor. What is a proto-doctor? Does that mean that we have a mold that we expect all of our students to attain this skill set? I think every student, every physician is an individual. And who are we to decide what your weakness is and how best to overcome that weakness? I think we have to say that we want our physicians to be highly skilled, we want them to be compassionate. We try to choose people like that on the admissions committee. But there is no one way to do it, and I think that's where we need to be a little bit more flexible. I think we have to trust millennials that when they get out to the real world, when they get to the VA, that they accept that responsibility and realize that they're all going to grow at a different rate when they're in medical school. We certainly have, we're not saying you don't have expectations, we're just saying that we're not the ones to point the finger like our little friend there and say, this is how you get to those expectations, this is how you meet those expectations. You get them when you need help, we're here to help. That's what I mean about us being able to execute. We can help you, but we're going to put you on the path and let you get there and help you, but we're not the ones that are going to formulate exactly how you get there.
And I would reframe that just a little bit by saying that I think what I'm saying about millennials is that the process of getting there may be different, but the expectation of where they should get, where they need to get, is not different. And I think we have to respect that process. I do think that we as faculty have a role in that. I mean, I think we have knowledge to bring to learning styles, learning techniques, and so on. But what I mean by meeting them where they're at is, for example, we had to memorize a lot of stuff, right? We had stuff written down in our pockets on little notebooks that had our name on them, and we were constantly referring to little charts and stuff. Nobody has to memorize that stuff anymore. Click, click, they have it in front of them. We have it in front of us. And so that type of learning doesn't really need to be emphasized. Yeah, there are facts we all need to know, but there's also facts that we can easily access in a different way. And so that's a tiny example of sort of reframing the expectations that we have. Factoids are not necessarily where it's at. Synthesis is where it's at, and problem solving, and we've always known that, and that's what you need to have to be a good physician. So we're not saying have the student be less accountable or less proficient or less excellent. We're saying perhaps the process of getting there needs to be different. And as faculty, we need to bring our expertise that we do have in maybe a slightly different way.
I will concede that that's an excellent point. You know, I sit at my desk every day when I'm in clinic and think to myself, why did I spend all of those hours memorizing this when all I have to do is Google and it'll tell me in 30 seconds.
That's a good example. But I think there were wonderful arguments on both sides of this debate. As I feared, we did not come up with an answer. I don't think any side won. So now
Well, we should put that to a vote. Come on.
Well, I guess we could. So we need your help. Comments, questions, concerns. Go ahead.
Hi, Eliza. Two facts and then a question for your perspective. From the point of view of cognitive psychologists, millennials are no different in their learning processes than anybody else for the last several thousand years. That has not changed. Education has changed. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second fact, if you review the theory by William Perry about 50, 60, 70 years ago, he did a study about the development of reasoning and intellectual abilities of college students. He came to the conclusion that maybe if they're lucky, an undergraduate senior may come to the stage of committed relativism, which is to say, I know that most things in life are relative, but I have committed to one perspective on this, and I will attempt to see the world in this way. And so I not only have information and learning and knowledge on my side and expertise, but I also have made a choice. And I would suggest that as teachers, our developmental stage is fairly likely that we have come to that stage of committed relativism in our intellectual abilities. But probably not all that long ago. Some of us are teaching when we're in our 30s or early 40s. So developmentally, a student that we see as a med student may have just reached that point. Okay, so here's the question. Can you account for why this issue of accountability of students, they're lazy, they're entitled, why that has been essentially a theme for the last 100 years of medical education, higher ed, high school. And I ask this quite openly and honestly because I think as educators in medicine, we really do see a very intense tension here about the very heavy responsibility you have and the very, very high standards that students have to reach. So I don't know the answer, but that's my perspective.
So is this a debate we could have had in 1917?
Absolutely, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. None of this is new, right? Change is constant. Every generation looks back on the prior generation and thinks, why are they doing these crazy things this way? That's not how, I was not taught. That's not how I grew up. But I think that it is correct that we do need to recognize some of the differences. And again, conceding to my esteemed colleague, it's not unreasonable to recognize that we need to make an attempt to meet the students where they are.
But I'm going to make another argument based on what you said. We've all recognized this. For the last 100 years, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have instant access to information. So for the past 100 years, you had to devote a certain amount of your intellectual development to acquisition of facts, information, and then kind of being able to developmentally advance that and synthesize new information, blah, blah, blah. But that window of effort is like this now. Because the millennial generation, and maybe the guys just before, don't have to acquire all that information through reading and whatever. It's instant. So I would argue that, yes, they've been making this argument for 100 years, but just like people say about everything, the internet changed everything.
But I think
Go ahead.
I think your comment was that the way that students learn has not changed. And I would agree with that. I think what's changed is the tools that are available. Yeah, so memorization is not nearly as important now as it was because of the internet. But you could say that, going back 50 years or 100 years, right? Memorization is not nearly as important as it used to be because now we have textbooks that have everything in them. Yeah.
To the pain of my primary care colleagues here, physical exam and history when you used to have to figure things out without a CAT scan.
You're killing me.
I am. I'm doing it. I know. And you know that I'm on your side with this. You know that in reality. But that's another example of how technology has changed in such a way that medicine has been remarkably changed. I think to the comment of every generation has its own shtick. I mean, the song that was written in, I believe, the 50s of What's the Matter with Kids Today? Why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? And if you're not careful, I will start singing it. I think that there are forces, social, historical, societal forces that shape how groups by age see the world. And I don't believe in stereotyping, but I do think that the greatest generation, people who grew up in the Depression, have one set of sort of world views. People that grew up during the Cold War, my favorite thing of having to go under your desk to escape the nuclear bomb, like what good was that going to do me? How am I going to be saved under my desk? That there are societal forces that do shape the world view of people by generation or by age. And I think that some of what differs is related to that. But I agree that there's, more stuff that's the same than that there is different. And that's what I mean about sort of finding the commonalities and being able to understand those forces in such a way that we can relate better to our young learners and their worldview.
Carla.
To me, it seems like the difference between the two arguments lies in really the two things. Number one, grades. Like, grades are at the central of this argument because if there was no such thing as grades, I think all of you would agree that medical students should be held to high standards and they should be accountable for their performance. I mean, we don't want doctors running around that are incompetent, and I think everybody agrees with that, right? But it's kind of like on this side, an honors grade should be achieved if a very high set of criteria are met, and if those are not met, an honors grade should not be given. And on this side, it seems more like, and I'm going to exaggerate, that if they try hard enough and you believe that they're trying hard enough, that they should get an honors grade. I know that's an exaggeration, but I think that the assignment of an honors grade, for instance, might differ on the two sides in terms of what criteria need to be met. But the other big thing, I think the first two things on your proposition is that they need to be held to high standards, they need to be accountable for performance. Nobody's going to argue those things. I think the big issue is taught in the ways that faculty think that they should learn.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing.
Agreed.
Is that, it depends on the faculty too. Like, the way that I teach may be very different than the way that somebody else teaches that's in a different generation than I. Or the way that I'm willing or not willing to be flexible in the way that I teach is different than the way that someone else may or may not be flexible. And so, to me, I think that what I'm hearing is that although that's saying that, different generation, that it doesn't matter what generation you're in, you're going to be able to, you're going to learn the same way. I think that the way that we teach, it has to be different for our current medical students than maybe the way that I was taught when I was in medical school, or the way that Missy was taught when she was in medical school. So I don't think that you guys are like really on opposite ends of the
No, we're
spectrum.
definitely
I just
different than
think
those
that
guys.
there's a couple
We get that.
that are central to kind of figuring out this argument.
And I just want to respond to that by saying that from my side of this argument, I do think there should be very high criteria to be recognized as honors. And back in the day when I was a clerkship director, which millennials hate, by the way, we ran 20% honors. on purpose. I mean, I kept it that way for a reason. And so there are ways to do that. I mean, our first 2 years are ungraded, so it's always a shock when they hit grades. That does not do them well sometimes. But I think the way to address that, the technique part of it that you're referring to, that we can all do regardless of our personal teaching style, is have exceedingly clear expectation and direction. This is a really bad example, but we have part of a rotation where students go to Planned Parenthood, or residents go to Planned Parenthood downtown, and they get a 2-page instruction sheet of how to take the bus, which side of the bus to sit on so you can see the right landmark, how to pull the little gizmo to get off the bus, because they don't know how to do that, and they can't figure that out by themselves. It's a little bit tragic, but true. And that, I mean, that may seem really overkill to us, but when I say meet them where they are, that's what I mean, is have clear instructions. Be fair. Don't apply one set of rules to one set of people and a different set of rules to a different set of people. You can't. They're very sensitive to that, and don't get offended by the questioning in a different way. Their view of hierarchy is different from ours. In the business world, I mean, we both did a lot of reading to come up with this, and in the business world, they give the example of the new hire millennial that thinks nothing of walking into the corner office, plopping down in front of the CEO and initiating a conversation, which those of us from a hierarchical background, which medicine is, would never do that. And so, you know, we have to not take offense at stuff like that. So the strategy that you're referring to, yes, I do think we need to change that. But the accountability, I think, I totally agree with you. We're all in agreement on the first part of this.
I'm going to disagree that we're all in agreement on it.
Oh,
You said we're
awesome.
held accountable for performance, and he just gave us data that 0.2% of the medical students fail a clerkship. So
Because
we're-
they get incompletes, because they didn't pass the
That's
exam.
correct.
So rather
So
than
I-
giving them a
They get a
fail,
lot of
we
time.
give them an
Little or
incomplete.
I refuse to believe that 0.2% of the medical students didn't meet a high standard. That, you know, I mean, it just
And I struggle with this,
right.
you know,
And it all
regardless
kind
of,
slopes down, because I think we all know that if you're really bad and you're incompetent, you're going to get a pass, and that's going to be your punishment for being bad.
we have raised the level of unsatisfactory, you know, or maybe I should say we have lowered the requirements for achieving unsatisfactory to such a point that it doesn't exist anymore. And that's a perfect thing you alluded to, right? What may have been an unsatisfactory years ago is now an incomplete, you know, and then we give them chances to remediate. And I'm guilty of this too, you know, when students fail my exam, I bring them into my office and I go over everything with them and, you know, help them to try to achieve that, because I don't want them to fail.
And we're no better than anybody in medicine. I mean, we sit on our as we're looking at our applicants, we're like, well, we don't want that guy. He's a good student, but we don't want him. He's not ready for our residency. He should go somewhere else.
And I will point out that
he's probably not ready to graduate.
this is not unique to, you know, the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. I think that, you know, medical schools across the country have taken this approach, and you know, one of the concerns raised are we, you know, putting our own students at a disadvantage when they go out there to compete for residencies if we are having a different grading scale than the rest of the country. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, I think, I mean, honestly, I think it is true across the country. When you start looking at grading scales and student evaluation systems and talking to people at, you know, nationally, we're all in the same boat.
And I actually don't care if we give too many honors or too many high passes or whatever. I don't care. But I do care if we're graduating people that are incompetent, because that's our primary mission.
We have a question back there.
I think one of the challenges we've alluded to the issue of professionalism and professional obligation. But a lot of this conversation is about sort of what the medical students, there's a lot of focus on sort of their psychological experience during this process. And I wonder, given what you're saying about sort of the creep in sort of definition of satisfactory, is there sort of a risk of training a generation of physicians that don't learn some of the early lessons about sort of how they feel versus how other people feel about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and that issue of professional obligation to another person who has a different definition of right and what's optimal than how they feel.
Well, I think this is a discussion that's important, and it's one that we've had. Missy and I talked about this recently. It's okay to fail. You know, we've kind of taken that away from them. You know, again, going all the way back to, you know, T-ball, where everyone gets the participation trophy. We don't allow anyone to fail anymore. And it's okay to fail sometimes, because I think that it allows us, you know, to learn and improve. And likewise, I think that when, you know, everything that we do is deemed to be superior, you know, it doesn't necessarily provide that motivation to really achieve what is superior.
Especially since, you know, if you're trying to train physician scientists, they are going to be rejected the first time they submit a manuscript. They are going to not get their first grant funded.
And we're not teaching them that that's going to happen.
Failure is built into the system of scientific inquiry.
But I disagree with that. We're not teaching them about failure. I mean, by your definition of failure, which is a grade. But I think you have to look at what the students are thinking, you know, and I think students know, and we all know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and when I don't meet my own expectations. I think we should be a little bit more broad in our definition of, you know, failure and success, and I think that's the argument. Like, who knows best, you know, when. You know,
one of the things that I ran across in discussing this with a student was their comment, and now this maybe is mainly applicable to the first couple of years, is that they have lost trust, okay? And that is causing them more stress. And they also pointed out to me something that comes from the psychology literature that I think, how do we get this guy?
It's got to go over there. You obviously failed that lecture.
Yeah, I failed. No, I need the directions like she does to have to find my way on the bus.
It's a bull.
Well, can you push the off?
Oh, man.
This is going to take me
You're
1
going
second.
low tech there, woman.
Yes, I mean, yay, I'm old, right? Okay.
If only we had chalk.
Okay. Here's performance. Okay, this is a psychological, and I can't spell either. I can't do this too. Okay. And this is stress or arousal. And this is a Yerkes Dodson graph, designed over 100 years ago in arousal. Okay? Now, normally, as we sort of pointed out, the performance rises with increased expectations, increased stress. But then it drops at a certain point, okay? So where's a medical student? Medical student's up here, all right? So, and this I wasn't familiar with until a week ago or so. And so it's caused me a lot of
Stress.
Sort of it. Yes, it's caused me a lot of arousal. A lot of stress. Because I thought, okay, we got to get this poor medical student to move this way. All right? And one of the ways that I think you do it is their
He's at peak performance up there.
No.
Yeah.
What?
He's at peak performance where you have him.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I increased that person's stress by saying study for your step 1. When they're already up there,
A sharper slope.
they're gonna.
That's right. They're about to fall off the edge.
They're about to
there.
fall off.
So,
But wait. So what I'm trying to get to is that being very clear about expectations, making them constantly accountable for their actions, can help move them this way. If they don't have trust that what you are telling them, and the way they can gain trust is by small steps and trying something, seeing if it works, seeing if it doesn't work, working at their own system of learning, their own study plans, things like that, with our help. If they think, a classic example that I hear a lot about is, step one, you're not teaching me what I need to know. Or you give me ambiguous signals because you tell me I'm doing fine, and oops, I get a, bad grade, or something like that. So I think that we need to engender trust, and we need to do it by making them accountable in small steps and constantly communicating correctly, what we expect. Not that they're there, and this is kind of what you're saying. You give them really detailed instructions. So I don't know what people think about this, but it's something that kept me up at night and made me stress out. Because I think if they fall down here, this is what we see in the first couple of years when they withdraw from the
See, I would argue that we have too many students who are on the left-hand side of the curve. We take some of the stress away inappropriately.
It's funny. I would argue that they're mostly on the right side of the curve.
Well, so it's
I would argue there's more than one curve.
I actually.
I don't know how to interpret this. Is what I'm saying. Yeah.
So what I am a strong believer of, and the premise I'm old and cranky, is that the problem's not the students. The problem's us, and the problem is with us holding them accountable. And so I'm just going to tell you my week. I'm just going to tell you my week. So I give a quiz in Intro to Physical Exam. I have students who aren't showing up for the quiz. They're not showing up for the quiz. I don't get an email. I don't get an excuse. I don't get anything. I'm running Teaching to Teach, and they will hear from me because I just got their names this week. I'm running Teaching to Teach this week. So I give 5 absences. I have 2 fourth-year students, both of whom are well known to me, so I think they would know me, who show up for the 9 to 12 session at 11:30 and want to sign in and get credit for it, right? And how can that happen for a fourth-year student? How has this school let that professionalism stand, right? Where's Debbie? Debbie just left. They're running a 4th-year asynchronous elective so that people can go interview. One student just came up and said, oh, she's really sorry, she has to go travel, she's not going to be able to get the assignment in, which was given a week ago, and everybody knew about it, right? I have a student in Intro to Physical Exam, Dr. DeFranco, who had an exam on Monday, but wanted to go to Philadelphia for his girlfriend's white coat ceremony on Monday, and indeed was given permission to miss class and an exam by Dr. DeFranco.
Me? How could I?
But that white coat is a symbol of professional.
And that girlfriend relationship might be really important, right?
But that's mixed signals. You're giving one,
Right.
you're giving another.
And
That's what
that
I'm
was
saying.
my point.
Shifting this has
My
got to be
whole point was about, I don't think the students are the problem. I think the faculty are the problem.
Well, you're pointing at me, so I'm.
Well, you're on that side, right?
So,
You're the owner.
Missy,
Right?
that was one of the
Right.
statements that I made in the beginning, right? It's also the
Yes,
responsible
you
of the
did.
faculty to
Right.
be consistent. And
Right.
we're doing them no favors
Right.
when, 95% of the students in this clerkship are being graded one way and it's totally different on the other end. Or when I send emails when my students show up 20 minutes late for orientation and I send them an email saying, why were you late? And they have no idea what I'm talking about because it was okay
I
in
was there.
clerkship
We
B,
have students
to show up late.
You get credit for showing up in PBL. They come around and they take the attendance sheets at, 15 minutes in. The students go to OMED and they're allowed to sign in, right? And, those kind of things just breed unprofessionalism. I don't care how we teach, right? Smart kids will learn however we teach. They can pick and choose how they teach. But for me, it's about holding them accountable. We had a student not too long ago who was scheduled to take a makeup clerkship exam. And she didn't feel ready to take it. So even though it was scheduled, ordered, paid for, she just sent an email saying she was not ready, so she wouldn't be in. Yeah. Right? Yes. And how can we allow that to happen? Right? I mean, you've got to be ready to take care of a patient. And with all due respect to physician scientists and error, you screw up with patients too. It's not about patients don't do well. And you have to be able to learn to function through that. So, I'm done.
Well, I'm powerful. This topic definitely raises strong emotion. I wish we actually could have come up with a consensus on this issue. I'm not sure we did. We still have to keep working on it, though. I want to thank you guys for your really good participation, and thank our panelists for